I might stand up if that's okay with the sound, because I've not got any slides. This is me trying to look interesting because I've not got any slides. I love things like this, so thanks for asking me to come along. And a lot of difficult ideas that people are grappling with at the moment, I think, and it's good. I'm going to talk about some of them and maybe even ask you to help me think about some of them, because I certainly don't have all the answers. And what I'm going to speak about tonight are not even my ideas. They're kind of ones that I've picked up from other people, and with talking to them or reading stuff, I've maybe brought them all together in one place. But I think that's quite important to know that anything that is created probably is created socially. It's not an individual that creates it. And while I might claim, or somebody might claim value for whatever it is they're creating and be able to sell it or whatever, how do we reward that social creation? How do we give that value? So I think that's quite important to start with. I'm going to talk about three things, really. Power, meaning and value, and how they're certainly not discrete. They're quite closely related to each other and affect each other quite significantly, and I hope that's obvious. But I think by thinking and talking about them, it might help us to understand where we are just now in this kind of, I've worked in politics for 30 years, and this feels like a really time of change. It feels like a time that things are in flux. And that's probably quite a positive thing in some ways, because when they're in flux, they can be moved into something better. But it's also a worrying thing because they can also be shaped into something worse. And we've got to decide how we, and the only thing that's going to make it better, not worse, is because people might be able to intervene and shape it into something better. Power is quite simple definition of power is the ability to make things good happen for you or make things bad happen for you, and that's for your community or yourself. But there's lots more complicated explanations of power, usually by French guys, but I'll try to keep it quite straightforward tonight as much as possible, not get too bogged down in theory. But obviously what those good and bad things in can be contested, and that's often done in political spaces, but what is good for a community or what is good for an individual isn't always as obvious as it might first appear. And I think that maybe when we're thinking about that, because that idea of good and bad is a kind of, it gets into ideas of reality and truth, and I think this big debate about the fake news at the moment is maybe a good way into that, because I get quite frustrated with this idea of fake news, because there's always been fake news. People have always manufactured stories that suit their interests. I was a victim of it myself. I used to work for the AV referendum campaign, and the Daily Mail ran a story about me saying that I was the Tony Soprano of the AV referendum campaign. I cried at Marley and Me, so being a mafiosa is like, it's just a ridiculous idea. But that kind of, it did give me the opportunity to use the one joke about electoral reform is, what do you get if you cross an electoral reformer and a mafiosa? Somebody that makes you an offer that you can't understand. It's a rubbish joke. So there's always been fake news, and it's just about who controls it or who makes it. And this brings me to this idea of reality. Has anyone read that book, Homo Deus? Read it, it's a fantastic book. And there's a discussion about this idea of reality, and most people think that reality, there's two types of reality. Subjective reality, so do you like Marmite or not like Marmite? And objective reality, like gravity. Gravity was there before Newton discovered it. It's a pretty objective reality. But the kind of difficulty with that is that most people, if they dismiss the idea that reality is subjective, so it's not just a matter of opinion, then it must be objective. So it must be as real as gravity is, if it's not something that. But Harari, who wrote Homo Deus, although this is not his idea either, this is quite a well thought and explored idea in philosophy and sociology. This idea of intersubjectivity, that when people get together, communicate with each other, big groups of humans, then they create stories about the world, and these become realities. And some of the biggest agents or forces in history, Harari is a historian, but this book's about the future. It's the history of the future in a way. But it's really good that he analyses the future from a historian's perspective. But this idea of intersubjectivity, so the biggest forces in history, like money and religion and nations and empires, are all intersubjective stories. They're stories that are shared within groups of people, and as soon as they stop believing in them, which sometimes happens with money, it's happened in Myanmar, and Laurie will probably know some of the better places where it's happened, but then it doesn't work anymore. It happened with the British Empire. People stopped believing it. It happened with the USSR. It was a massive, chunk of reality, but certainly when people stopped believing it, it wasn't there anymore. So, we've got to think about what this reality is and who's creating it, because that's where the real power is. The reality of power is the ability to create those stories and interweave them. That's why the Daily Mail is so powerful. I used to work for the Labour Party. At that time, Alistair Campbell could control information and meld information and create stories, and that was why he was kind of so powerful and why they were quite successful, really. But they had on board with them people like Murdoch and stuff who are probably the real meaning makers. And there's another aspect to that, and that is about the future. That these stories, determine how we kind of behave and the decisions that we make, predominantly and about the way that we want to shape the future. And that's this is a modern phenomenon. People in the past did not really think that the future would be that much different from the present. They thought the future would be like their parents' lives and stuff. In fact, it's probably the defining thing of modernity, is that we think the future will be different. Capitalism is about investing in the future. And I think that idea of a different future and how you're going to behave to shape it, and who controls the stories that make you behave and think about things different is pretty important. The other aspect of power in our society is institutions. The way that we organise ourselves. Organising is really, really important. It's like, whenever there's big changes, whether it was the Russian Revolution or whether it was neoliberalism, Milton Friedman said, we loitered with intent. They had organised across the developed world in academia and stuff. They loitered waiting for the opportunity, but they'd organised. And you can see, just think about where it was this organisation, or where it's Glasgow City Council, or where it's the government, or whatever it is. We need to have institutions by the way we organise society, and the way that power and those intersubjective stories are progressed and told. But one of the difficulties, perhaps, with these institutions is they are always hierarchies. They always have some people at the top with more power, and other peoples within them that are having power exercised over them. And there's even a theory for it. I've forgotten the guy's name now, but he studied the German Social Democrats Party and other bits in Europe quite a long time ago. He came up with this theory. It was called Iron Law of Oligarchy, and it is whenever human beings get to create any sort of organisation, the larger it is and the more sophisticated or complicated it is, the more this rule becomes true, but there always becomes an oligarchy, there always becomes a ruling elite that runs it. And obviously that ruling elite are the ones that want to create the stories and intersubjectivity that maintains their power. And we might think this is okay, because they might, if that ruling elite and that oligarch were acting in the interests of us all in the common good, then that might be all right. And maybe sometimes they are, and maybe sometimes they think they are. But it's not really. Well, it's not empowering for us. It's almost infantilizing us. It's like, you know, these people, are they our parents? Or, and I guess we've got to ask this question, did we give them the consent? Because I think oppression is, power is like this. If I'm quite comfortable with you exercising your power over me, that's fine, you know, if I condone it. But any time that anybody exercises power over anybody else without their consent, I would say that's oppression. I've thought about this a long time and I've seen it in action. And it's oppressive to exercise your power over somebody without their consent. And did any of us consent to having this intersubjective story about this world, the neoliberalism that was explained, Laura explained? Did we know that the stories were getting created about our world in this way? I know I didn't consent to this, that sort of reality, that individualism, that competition. And so just to give two examples of how these stories have been created and have become so dominant. One is this idea of meritocracy. I don't know if anybody saw Theresa May launching a manifesto the other day. This idea of meritocracy came back because it's been about for a while. In fact, it was first coined as a satire. It's an idea that it's a bit of a joke, really. On the surface, though, if you think of a society that rewards go to people on merit, that sounds all right, doesn't it? But just even think about it for a second. You know, actually, what we're saying in a meritocracy is that all the prizes go to the already gifted. It's a complete kind of, it's a justification for more oligarchy and for more sets of people exercising their power over you. And that idea is kind of, it ran out of steam for a while there. Culturally you could see and this idea that even if you were good at something, worked hard, it didn't necessarily mean that you would be successful in a neoliberal society. I think about Breaking Bad. Walter White was really good at chemistry, but he couldn't succeed within the system. And another reference would be Girls against Sex in the City, because Sex in the City was a meritocratic kind of rewards for them, and then Girls is a little bit less stable and stuff. So this idea ran out of steam, but it's become, that intersubjective story has become resurrected and tried to be forced upon us again. Another example I'd give you is this idea of growth, which is really, really dominant. Even in communist countries, it's this idea of growth, that we have to grow the economy all the time, that we have to have to make profit and reinvest it in order for us to have successful societies. How dominant it is, that's a story. I'll give you an example of that. My friend works in a bank. She has to fly up and down to London all the time. She's really busy. She actually likes working in a bank. But her mother is not very well, and she actually does want to get involved in this community garden programme that's going on as well. But she just hasn't got time. So she's left the state to look after her mother, and the community garden project's actually going nowhere. And those are decisions that are made. They're not practical decisions in a way. They're ethical decisions. They're decisions that are made on moral questions and on values. But capitalism has made that decision for her a long time ago. She doesn't really have any choice in that. The way that we've organised ourselves and set her up, she's going to go and work for the bank because growth is is the key thing. But if that is not a scientific decision, if that is an ethical decision, then that concept of growth in capitalism is as much like a religion as any other religion. And it is quite a good religion because you get the rewards on earth, you don't have to die for them, but it is not anything other than a created story. So because where do the other values, like where does the value of family go in there? You know, what about family ties? What about the value of community? Somebody spoke about rebuilding communities. I think that's vital, but you know, the dominant narrative that we live under at the moment and that's created by people in power doesn't value that, doesn't allow for it. Incentivizes for different behaviour and disincentivizes for that type of behaviour. So I think we've got to kind of, I might talk a little bit in a wee while about how we can challenge that, but it's good to know that stuff, I think. I need to get bifocals, you know. Let me talk a little bit more about these institutions. I want to say something more about the ideas of human intersubjectivity as well, because there seems to be no space within these ideas for, you know, they need to be black and white. You know, you can't be a Jew and a Christian. These are intersubjective ideas. Religions are intersubjective ideas. You have to kind of be an enemy or a friend, and you can maybe understand where that comes from in human evolution, but it doesn't really help us much now. I think the idea of why can't we think about the future without thinking about growth? These again, I think the idea of paradox is really quite important here. I've not got time to go into it, but I think, you know, why do we have to have one thing or the other always? Why do they have to be bipolar? Why do they have to be set off against each other? I think I come back to this being a time of fascinating change in lots of ways. And why I think that is post 1945, we set up these institutions that were supposed to give us more democratic and equal societies. That was their claim. I've worked for all of them, I think. I worked for the Labour Party, claimed to be set up. I worked for the trade union movement, bits of the state, local government. We're going to make society more democratic and equal. But every one of them, and I can tell you this from full experience, were not democratic and not equal. They were oligarchs, they were about personal power, they were about people getting to the top and having control. And I think it's very, very difficult for an institution or organisation to argue for a more democratic and equal society when they're not like that themselves. It feels hypocritical in that. No wonder people kind of lost faith in their ability to do it. I think it was really hard for them to do anyway, but they kind of lost faith in them to do it. And also, the idea of organising as hierarchies was almost inevitable, because in order to make big decisions and to run complex organisations, and this is where the iron law of oligarchy, I think, might be able to be bent now. You need to get information into a central point where somebody could look at it, and then you have to make decisions, and then throw out those decisions and tell people what to do. You can only photocopy so much information. You could only distribute so much information. People wouldn't be able to kind of have that information, so that everybody could have an input into that decision. So in some ways, hierarchies might have been inevitable, but I guess the real sort of opportunity and excitement at the moment is that information is not like that anymore. Information can be shared so easily, and electronically it can be created, shared, commented on, and you have this real opportunity now for much more horizontal organisation, for networks really to be sites of power instead of hierarchies. I was really, really optimistic about this for quite a few years. And I still am in a way, but what you've seen to began to realise is that through social media, be micro-targeting, some of the stuff that's been used in political campaigning, deep behavioural psychology, collecting all that data about people, the people that always want to have power and are always looking for power started to use those networks and those means of us connecting with each other to exert their power. And that's probably always the way it's been. Whenever technology allows democracy to move on, that sharing of power to move on a little bit, then the people that don't want power to be equally shared, they want to concentrate it in their own interests, find a way of doing it. I mean, post-45, when we had voting, when we had like the printing press, when we had the steam engine, when information was able to be moved about by technology, and then we had universal suffrage and voting, and democracy made some steps forward in the 60s and 70s, but then people found out how to use newspapers and media and stuff to kind of usurp it a bit. And I think the same's happening, but the truth is I think that we're still making progress. We can still imagine a structure that is, and a way of organising that is much more democratic and equal than those old hierarchical institutions. So this change has maybe never been more possible. I think democracy's got to be remade again and again in reaction to those that we'd want to concentrate power. I'll just hone in a little bit more on what we are doing, because I've been thinking hard about how you take, lots of us have, they say these are not all my ideas, how you take advantage of this moment when we can actually prefigure the sort of society we want to be. If those are the old institutions that were claiming to be equal and democratic weren't, then the society was never going to be, because they were a big part of that society. They were, they were ingrained institutions of it, and if they weren't equal and democratic, how was the rest of it going to be more equal and democratic? But if we can create organisations and institutions that are equal and democratic, using technology or whatever, or scale probably is quite important. These things are too big. But small things need to be networked, because we need that power of scale as well. Then we can actually prefigure the sort of society we want to create. We can show and be how we want the wider society to be. And I love that idea of prefiguration. It's gained a lot of traction in Podemos in Spain and other places where they're trying to organise in different ways. So what interventions can you make? Because we have ranged against us, the most powerful institutions, people, organisations in the world by their very nature. That's what they exist to do and pursue, is the concentration of power. But I think that's why organisations like this and some of the stuff that we're doing in ERS with Common Weal and other, a whole group of coalition partners called Act As If You Own the Place. And it's really about the idea that scale is important, because if the iron law oligarchy applies to bigger, more complicated structures, then we need to first of all find building blocks of smaller, flatter, more equal structures. And we're asking people in communities across Scotland to kind of come together and do different types of democracy, because this idea of democracy is just about voting is not true. It's not. Where democracy happens is in spaces where people get together, question, debate and argue. Maybe they then go and vote, but if you're just sitting as an individual in front of your telly arguing with the telly, then you're not going to have a collective view of what you're voting for. You have to be in a space, and maybe that's how we get round the kind of usurping of the social media and stuff. We need to actually see each other and talk to each other in order to create real democracy. So we want to get people together in communities around Scotland in this Act As If You Own the Place campaign, and get them to try and imagine what it would be like if they ran their own community, ran their own place. Because I know for a long time when I worked in local government, so don't raise people's expectations, they'll only be disappointed. But I think this is the time to really raise their expectations, to get them to think about what it would be like if they could run their own town, village, art gallery, whatever. So the more of that I think the intervention we make is just to encourage that as much as possible. That's not to say that stuff will make the changes necessary on their own. Those spaces are, though, where we start to create alternative stories to the intersubjectivity that's coming from on high. We can start to make different ideas of what it would be like, different values, value of family or the value of community or stuff, and not just the values of growth or meritocracy. But they're not enough on their own. Even if we can connect them all up into a network, the state has to not, at the very least, not be antagonistic towards them, because the way that these institutions are structured at the moment, they're hierarchies and about power and about, you know, holding power and not sharing it and stuff. Then they're antagonistic to those ways of organising. But that's one thing that network can do. It can start to force itself against the state and try and make it change its shape, so that it at least not antagonistic, and ideally at some point it becomes supportive to it. And some of there's examples of this happening. The Scottish Government, is the stuff that lawyers spoke about, the Scottish Government's also bringing forward a local democracy bill this year, and the bill team are very keen to see what's happening and act as if you own the place stuff, because they struggle with these ideas because it's very, very different. I think what we're all struggling with is trying to imagine a kind of different way of organising our society and community without any pictures and without any metaphors yet, and without any experience of what they are. So it's great that we're trying to find our way towards it, but that's all we're going to ever be able to do, is experiment and find our way towards it. So the Bill team are really struggling with some of the different ways of trying to think about local government and local democracy, but at least they're trying. And that's kind of our kind of ambition, is that we kind of change the state so that it can be supportive to things like market gallery. So I'll just finish there. Thanks very much.
Does anyone have any questions? Thank you very much for that.
Sort of a question. What's the difference between, it's not a joke, between spin, PR, opinion and lying? And the other thing at the end of that is, does it occur to anybody that people actually believe that crap? That we have all this information flying around and that we can say that people want to believe it, they actually believe it? Like religion, like they want to believe Trump.
Yeah.
They do believe him.
Yeah.
And that I don't know if that lies are successful, that people were ready and prepared to accept the crap.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like this idea of truth is quite a difficult idea. You know, what is true and what isn't, and and that's what I think is important to take away, is that there is the nature of power is that it does try to shape reality, your experience of reality, and just I think partly what is going on. This always happened, and there's a raised level of consciousness. One of the things I think is really important is that raised levels of consciousness and awareness that there isn't, this isn't just the facts, this isn't just the truth. And that's happened over quite a short period of time, because when I worked for New Labour, people really, there was only one reality, and it's whatever Alistair Campbell decided he was going to spin on it, So I think that grappling with these things is encouraging, I think. But yeah, there's, that fact that there's a lot of lies out there now is, I think, is a step forward.
Anyone else?
I was wondering if you could expand a bit on the campaign. I forgot the name of it. But we act as if we own the place.
Yeah.
Like how's that structured differently to stuff like common will and stuff like that?
Well, what we do is we just ask a local community if they want to be part of the campaign, and then we have local partners in the community, and their ideas. I probably should have said a little bit more about this, but I thought I was running out of time. They organise what we call a deliberative democracy event. So there's lots of techniques whereby people can discuss, highlight problems with their community and come up with solutions. A lot of it learned from South America, actually, which is not just about here's a proposition, vote for or against it, or debate it and argue about it. There's ways of kind of trying to get groups of people to come to shared conclusions on stuff, or even to disagree in a reasonable way. But the fascinating thing about that is that most people that go through these processes become changed, they become different types of citizens. Electoral Reform Society ran a couple of weekends on devolution in England, one in Portsmouth and one in Sheffield, and they were just ordinary people. They weren't, they were actually paid for it, so they weren't they weren't people that were just political geeks or stuff. And they went through this process, and then we took them to Westminster to talk to MPs, and people were saying, "Look, I'd never interested in any of this stuff before." These are quite complicated ideas. Ordinary people can, if you run these things properly, ordinary people can come to conclusions and get pretty genned up on what experts would tell you is just the realm of experts. So we go to these communities, we have them, they produce a plan to say what they would want for their local community, and hopefully we leave behind a kind of group of organised activists who are then going to try and make those things happen in their community in very difficult circumstances, because if you don't have the state helping you, then it's difficult.
And what's that conversation like? Are you like at the beginning of this, just to let you know you're going to take these ideas forward, we're not going to? Do you have to be really?
Yeah, well, we're probably not as blunt as that. We're saying, like, let's find ways to take them forward, but we've not got, we've not got any money. We've only got like a couple of staff, so. But it just every time I go to one, I'm enthused by people wanting to do this stuff. They're limited by time and resource and stuff, and that's why we have to that's probably why I'm a big supporter of the citizens' basic income, because that then allows people to do that stuff, But all of this stuff is done in opposition to structures, institutions, and the shared narrative that is for a different way of organising your society. So you got to bear that difficulty in mind. But then the question is like, okay, then do we accept that? And I'm not a massive anti-capitalist in lots of ways. I think it's kind of taken us forward in some ways to a certain point. It's just what comes next, where do we go from here? Same with democracy. Democracy's got as far as it can go in its current form. And people know that. That's why a lot of them aren't voting or are not taking part. It's like, but what comes next, Because otherwise, the alternatives seem to be populism and demagoguery, and that's worrying.
Let's ask a question in terms of, I guess, where you think the arts, and particularly arts organisations, what part they play within, particularly the idea of democracy. It strikes me very much, not an organisation like the Market, which is run by a committee, but generally within the arts, the big arts organisations, they kind of run on a very hierarchical. They've taken on the language of business. They have executive directors, and Arts Council England. The new chair is obviously Sirota, who's led an organisation in very much that kind of manner. I look at it often and think, it's part of the problem rather than the solution in a way. A lot of those organisations. I just wonder if you had a view on that.
Just to agree with you entirely, yeah. I mean, obviously these institutions are as much parts of our culture and society as any of the other big institutions. So it'd be nice to see if people were experimenting with different ways of organising them, or putting pressure on for different ways to organise them so as they are more democratic and equal. But I think somebody earlier said, like, well, I think there's also a role. I mean, these intersubjective narratives are created through culture. That's a really important thing. Who tells stories and shows metaphors and pictures and stuff of what things like artists. I mean, but I think acknowledging that any creation is a social creation. I mean, you could be like the young British artists and completely immerse yourself into selling stuff and reinforcing what is a kind of inhumane narrative in some ways, or you could make stuff that is going to show alternatives. That's, I guess, a challenge for artists.
I guess for me, it feels like it's a challenge. It's a challenge more for the organisation. It's a challenge for artists as well, but it's that. I guess that's why I asked the question, because there's a real hypocrisy at the heart of that, because that narrative that arts organisations maybe are often involved in presenting, or seem to be, maybe says one thing, but then maybe their actions and their organisation and the way they structure themselves gives an entirely different story. So it becomes quite a, I think perhaps a lot of people have much faith in some of these narratives that they present, because then they look at the, it doesn't add up.
It's total. I mean, there's the massive hypocrisy, and the Labour Party to claim it's an interest in democracy and equality when it was, run by in such a kind of autocratic, top-down manner. And I think any of these institutions that claim to be about equality and that, and I mean, even my own institution, there's you've just got to be honest about the contradictions that are in there. But I think being honest about the contradictions is the first step, and then trying to change them. I mean, I get paid more than other people in my organisation. I'd probably much like to share that wage bill out more equally. I try to give them as much power as possible, but because I've got a mortgage, it still comes back to what Laurie was talking about the way that the housing market drives inequality in lots of ways. Have you got any thoughts on is there any sort of these institutions that are kind of organised in a better way?
It made me think about social intentions, the discussion forum, the CCA that happened, and there was a lot of talks about different structures there. Mima used an example where they had the community would be this program a lot of the events and stuff like that. They're trying as a big organisation trying to flip it a bit.
Yeah.
I think there's recognition within, I think Meme's a good example, I guess, and I guess CCA as well to some extent. There's a recognition within the sector at certain levels that these things need to change, but I guess like you just said, that often the issue comes back to the fact that you're operating within the constraints of the fact that, if you're a director and you've got a mortgage to pay and you've got, you're very unlikely to sort of suddenly say, oh, it's dismantle this structure and I'll just be on the same ways. Of course you're not going to, and that's perfectly realistic, unrealistic to expect that to happen. But
Can I say, I was just thinking of an example in Berlin. It's called the Kunsthaus, where it's run as a cooperative. So the way that they finance their program is that they have a number of associates that pay a yearly fee, and what that allows you is so every year they have an assembly where people come up with proposals for exhibitions, and the members vote or decide, discuss. So it lasts as long as it has to last. So the meeting can be a day or 2 days.
Yeah.
And on that meeting they decide the program for the next year and the allocation of money. So it's run in a kind of very, very different way from the arts organisation.
I think it's a really interesting and important thing that needs to be discussed in the arts, because that reason that you said that what the arts does, not just the visual arts, but it's about telling stories and creating narratives, and that's what it does. And so it's all interconnected. It feels like I don't have any answers. I'm just.
I think experimentation's a big part of it. People that have got the guts to try stuff. It's always a lot easier to show people stuff than it is to explain it to them or to write about it. So people. That's why we like Act As If, because it's actually people going away and doing stuff, not asking permission, just going and trying to take back some power to reorganise their own communities. Somebody said this earlier, it struck me how separate neoliberalism is a kind of way of separating. It doesn't really want collectivism or that, because that's a resistance. That's why they broke the unions, why communities struggle so much, because it's anti-growth in a way if you kind of organise in that way. If you're looking after your family or if you're doing community work, it doesn't really help growth in any way. The way that art's become so separate and cultures, making stuff and that's become so separate from communities and turned into big business, it's just a symptom of the other stuff, and I don't know. Some people might like that, but I mean, I think there's a kind of there's a movement to be made to reverse that and to make it something much more fun and interesting and human.
I think an alternative to that might be, is possibly some of the more creative protest groups, such as Sisters of Cut and Live in Rent in Scotland.
Yeah,
They're very non-hierarchical, they work pretty well,
yeah.
and they make quite an impact, and they're very creative in how they protest. I think it's
Yeah, it becomes part of the campaign then, yeah, it's not some separate.
As well in Govan.
Yeah.
Because they spoke, I don't know, like, they were part of one of the acts of the
Yeah, they were, yeah.
workshops, so they run sociocratically, where
Yeah,
even to function sociocratically as an organisation, you have to do constant decision making
yeah.
rather than consensus. So
Yeah.
everybody, I don't know, you probably explain it better.
I know, but there's some great emerging methods and techniques of people not having to be hierarchical in the way that they decide stuff and organise stuff. Sociocracy is one of them. I don't know loads about sociocracy, I just know it's there. But you know, and more in the developing world actually, but Leith's started to do this ideas where communities come up with what they want, they come up with a manifesto and they want the political party to tell them how they're going to deliver it instead of giving the power to political parties. So they say, this is our manifesto, you know, this is what you're getting. But it's time and space to do that stuff. Turns the power on its head, really.
Glasgow autonomous space as well, I listen to what's on Wednesday, they're quite a good example.
Do you know, one of the things we want to do at the end of the summer is just get everybody that's doing interesting stuff like that together in one place so that they can talk to each other and learn off each other and build that community and network of people that are doing stuff for themselves, really.
It struck me just when you said that, about having time and space and then talking about the obsession with growth. It says growth is about denying people the time and space
Yeah.
for doing things, really, isn't it? Because it's always about, as you described your story about your friend looking for the bank. There's no time, there's no space, there's just growth. It's just
Yeah.
about growth.
And I wouldn't want to get into that kind of black and white thing either again, you know. I think, you know, there's stuff that comes from economic growth and capitalism that is, you know, that is not all bad. So why are we forced to choose one thing or the other? You know, why can't we have, you know, enough time, but a little bit of growth so that we can, you know, nice technology and stuff? Why can't we have both? You know, seems strange to me. But it seems to be a product of the system that you have to. You know, you can only have one thing or another. You can only be made to go faster and faster.
I'm from a school of thought where I think that the democratic deficit is largely down to the fact that the UK hasn't experienced a social revolution in history.
Okay.
And electoral reform is something that happens incremental. Is there a possibility to use the populism to the advantage of political reform?
Well, it's an interesting debate. I mean, if you look at places like Spain, Podemos, which is a loose network, a new form of political party in some ways, although has succumbed to the iron law of oligarchy, like all institutions do. They have tried to use a kind of populist anger against the cuts. They had much greater austerity than they did here to push for some social transformation and better democracy. They run Barcelona and they run Madrid, so there is some success in that. My worry with populism is always that you have to end up hating on somebody, really. And whenever those methods of social change have come about, then it just becomes the next group of kind of power seekers that become, you know, the powerful and hating on another group, you know. So I think we've got to find a way of having social change that has to be truly democratic and equal and is not about big leaders and one group hating on another. Even if we don't like bankers or you know, capitalists or financiers or Tories for that matter, you know, I think we've got, in some ways there is much, they've got to take responsibility to some extent, but I think they are some of them are victims of the system as well. And it is looking at human history, revolutions just end up being the next group of kind of oppressors. So, got to find a way to break that cycle.
But do you think there's a problem that the UK has never had a social revolution? I mean, some bad things happen, of course. I agree.
English revolution.
Bad things do happen during revolutions, but in the long run, we learn and we grow.
It's maybe a bit populist to say this, but I like Russell Bland's idea about revolution, which is kind of a revolution of consciousness and stuff rather than kind of a bloody revolution. There's a lot of things wrong with the UK, and a lot of it is down to kind of an empire and a class system and an attachment to hierarchy, because we've got a greater attachment to hierarchy than any others. We've got a monarchy, and this idea that there's people better and more powerful and no better. I mean, the whole idea of the expert is a problem for democracy. But I think that's been the right's exposed it better than the left in some ways. But because it's good to have experts, you wouldn't want to build a bridge without an engineer. But on the other hand, economists are probably, Laurie will agree, economists are probably the worst at that. But using that expertise to concentrate power and wealth and to look after your own interests and not a public interest inevitably leads to lack of confidence in them, because if they go, well, you're just telling me these economic things because it makes you rich and powerful, then why are you going to trust them? So I think that's to come back to your point about the problems with the British state. There's lots of them. I'm not sure what type of revolution would have made that. There's revolutions in Russia, revolutions in other parts of the world. It doesn't necessarily mean they've got a new social and democratic order that is fit for this new time, I don't think.
I think with the the whole Mélenchon thing in France, and how he kind of surged in the polls just by, like you said, using this populism. Rhetoric. But what they had in France is this idea of the Sixth Republic, and sort of, and this, they're obviously a very different state to Britain.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that's the problem, because we did have a revolution, because it was the English Revolution, and we tried to install a Commonwealth, and that idea has totally been co-opted, the idea of Commonwealth. And I just raised, it's not really a question, but that link to common weal as well, I thought was quite interesting, the idea of a Commonwealth.
We also have people revolting against us, so we do experience revolution on the other side. So clearly, that's why we're empire, and it's not that we have.
So I'm just wondering, maybe we need to be a bit more Machiavellian with our terms, right? So these ideas, I think,
I think language is hugely important. There's a brilliant piece in Bella Caledonia today by Madeline Bunton. She speaks about the subversive and radical nature of Gaelic, because it, just what words mean, like the words for land mean shared and community owned and stuff, whereas so I think all this intersubjectivity storytelling stuff, a lot of it is about how you find the right language and right metaphors and stuff.
I think populism is the wrong language, because it doesn't make sense to be like, we want democracy, we want everyone to have a say, but when there's ideas that are really popular, they're called populist. It doesn't make sense, because why would that, it's not negative if loads of people get behind an idea, it's only negative just because we particularly don't like that idea. Like with Brexit, I mean, it's like, that's a populist thing that happened, but people who don't want Brexit call it populist as if that's a bad thing, but if it's something popular, and then it doesn't make sense to me what that term is.
It might do, because the term is pretty loosely used and there's different kind of definitions for it. And strictly in political science, it probably means more like there's a populist that you're turning one bit of the population against another bit of the population. So, and that's a pretty well developed, used strategy for people that want to seek power, is that you go, well, it's them over there, if they're different, we're all part of one thing. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to think it means like popular policies as well. But the problem is that different people think it means different stuff.
What do you mean when you talk about Russell Brand?
Russell Brand's wrote a book called Revolution.
But he's not trying to pit one person against another, right?
No, I don't think he's a populist though, really. Did I say that? Right. I mean, popular. See the problem? Yeah. No, I think for all Russell Brand's problems, I think this idea of a revolution being about awareness and consciousness is right. I mean, I'm optimistic about Scotland because having been involved in politics for 30 years and going through the independence referendum and seeing a kind of change in people's consciousness and awareness, and I think we're probably one of the most politically aware and informed societies in the world, and we're of a good size as well. Scale is important, so I think there's opportunities for us here to kind of lead in the way we're going to remake democracy, or the way we might reorganise our society. I guess the other big factor here is like that continuous growth, is not possible because of the environmental and sustainability issue. But that's going to put a damper. Even if you thought it was a good idea, we're going to have to find other ways to kind of organise ourselves, I think. And somebody's got to find them though. We don't know what they are, so we're going to have to experiment and try and tell each other what they might be. But I think what Laurie said there about business as usual, this kind of zombie capitalism, despite the collapse of that way of doing things and all the inherent problems and contradictions in it, because there isn't any alternative, then it just keeps on zombieing along. Who knows where it will end up? But that's why it's imperative upon us to try and find some different ways.
Any more questions? Oh yeah.
Can I just ask about, I'm really interested in this idea about, like narratives and the person who's telling the story has got the power and all that kind of stuff. And if when you're talking about we need to tell new stories, the problem is all the stories that really resonate with people or that maybe are in history is everything from Star Wars to Christianity. You've got goodies and baddies and you've got simplicity of your narrative. How do you tell new stories that are more complicated and that aren't hating on someone? Or I'm just interested in that idea of like creating new stories.
I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it's possible, or is it impossible, or should we try it?
Because it's not just the story; it's also the reading of the story.
Yeah, I think there's an element to it where we're very, we love to talk about truth and reality and all these things and alternative facts, especially that we're talking a lot about today. And I think it's important for telling future stories to really be aware of all the different facts and all the different stories within a single story. That's it's very easy to say, oh yeah, this revolution, and just talk about it from one perspective. But if you immediately take one minority's perspective or another minority's perspective, we suddenly get two very different versions of the same events. And I think in future storytelling, we have to begin to realize that there isn't just a story. That's the most ridiculous and ludicrous thing in the world.
Yeah.
There's as many people were involved in this story, there are that many stories. And that's what we have to begin to realize.
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree. I think there is one basic story. Star Wars is based on the hero with 1,000 faces. There are different versions, updated, modernised stories, and there are certain tropes, archetypes within one story. And I do think we need to find a new story within that. There's the sacred child, the hero, the person who's going to be rescued. We have a very distinct narrative, and it's very hard to find something new within that. Star Wars is a version of that. It's the classic example of George Lucas found that book. That's what he did.
But Star Wars from the stormtrooper's perspective hasn't been told.
Just it's Star Wars.
But I think it's very dangerous to take this perspective of there being these certain narratives and us telling our stories through these narratives, because then we're able to do what you're talking about, changing these narratives and making people think that there's only a single narrative. So we have to get away from this idea of these kind of overarching narratives that we fit all our lives into and realize that these don't exist. They're just made up in our heads, and we have to take all these different.
And maybe that's the shift in consciousness, but the people getting together and understanding and realizing that this is, what. In the past, people believed in all sorts of things that we wouldn't believe in now, as fact, they're intersubjective facts, Harari wrote a piece in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago about how these people that were really concerned about, if there was more leisure time, young people getting lost in virtual reality games, and what I think it was called meaning beyond work. So, it would be really distressing if everybody went and found their meaning in virtual reality games. And he lives in Jerusalem, and he was saying, but for centuries, Judaism is a virtual reality. Christianity is a virtual reality. People have been killing each other over these games of virtual reality. So it's just a different virtual reality. But I think the awareness of it is possibly the key to kind of, freedom from that being used as a form of oppression and different conflicting virtual realities, crashing against each other in bad ways.
Well, just thinking of narratives and stories, I think there is maybe a crisis of stories that belongs to work, jobs, occupation, and the whole thing of work has become very complex after all these technologies have become part of life. That means that the distinction between when you're at work and when you're not is very blurred and very fuzzy. And I think also job titles, lots of people today are very confused about what their job actually is. What's the boundaries? Where does it begin? Where does it end? With the fall of lots of unions, and the way in which local areas are tied to some sort of industry that does this or that or the other. These sort of occupational narratives
and identities,
And where do you belong to? What's your own occupational narrative?
I think that's this is a time of rapid change and confusion, and fear.
I think that's maybe one of the things that can also lead to what has been named the precariat, growth of the precarious class in society.
But we have given up definite meaning. When people told us we were, you were going to live a life the same as your parents. You were going to die and go to heaven, or you were going to die and go to hell. Things was definite. There was, meaning was obvious, but you couldn't change it. You couldn't change your life. You couldn't shape the future, and so you give up that certainty and meaning for a bit more power. And some people might not like that, but for me, it's quite exciting that there's not a massive certainty to the future or a massive certainty to my identity or who I am. And I think that's one of the interesting things, is that we could make these things for ourselves now, together with who we want, instead of having people on high telling us who we are and what our life is and what our job is. That would be real kind of democracy and real kind of liberty.
I just think it's very difficult maybe for someone, say a single mom with 3 kids, dependent on the system and maybe having a small part-time job to try to sustain herself on, and there's lots of people for whom uncertainty and what's going to happen next is really scary. To manage and handle.
I get that entirely. That's why we need good social security. We need to remove that fear and worry from people, and then they can take part in the interesting, exciting things about imagining and being part of a community and making stuff for each other, because that's that's where real kind of fun and pleasure comes from, isn't it? Like really doing stuff for each other. That's people are told that isn't there, but you only have to do it to realise it's where kind of you can find real meaning in doing that stuff. So that's why I could talk more about the basic income, because I'm the chair of the Basic Income Network, and it's something that's getting. The reason that I do support it is because I think it's a transformative thing where we share out the value and resources that we create in such a way that we can feel safe to try out new stuff and to work with each other and be part of a community. We're not running on that mill trying to pay that mortgage or get that status from that job title.
What do you think about it? Is it called a universal or a basic dividend? That sort of, which basically, I think I'm not very good at economics, but I think it's something to do with shares instead of taxes. So we wouldn't sort of we'd pay for a basic income using like a minuscule percentage of a share, so that's just, and it's taken as if everyone belongs to that, because it's right. Everyone owns that sort of percentage by right, just by being in the UK. I just don't know if you've heard that sort of.
I've heard Robin McAlpine talking about something like it, I think, which I think it was a national housing company that you had a share in. But I think this idea that this idea that ownership is the Commonwealth idea, this idea that the land belongs to people, or when really it should belong to all of us, seems like a good way of thinking about it, a different way of thinking about the world, and a much better way. It's a different. Maybe that's one of the different stories that we need to start to tell.
Because I think it gets around that sort of usual criticism of basic income, when you say to your family or something, they say, "How would you fund it?" And you're just taking other people's money, something like that. Whereas I think if you could frame it in such a way that sort of it really just demonstrates that you're right almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right about, we have to kind of understand that the story that most people have about the world is a neoliberal story, and we're not going to overturn that overnight. Although history tells you that the certainties and realities that were of one age are not necessarily the certainty and realities of another age, and those kind of networks of understanding will shift, and they will, without a doubt. But I think we have to kind of engage with the rules as they are a little bit at the moment. So you have to make, if you want a basic income, you have to make an economic argument about how you pay for it. And it is possible. I know Annie Miller, who's on the Basic Income Network with me, has got a book coming out within a couple of weeks to say how you pay for it. And of course you've got to get into the problems of economists measuring everything, but you have to measure into the failure costs. If people, if single mothers are people full of anxiety or social breakdown and alienation, then that all costs all of us money, and it's not included into any sort of social security system at the moment, so it has to be built into it, I think. Don't know if you want to say anything else on that, Laurie.
Just on the dividend thing, so a number of people proposed stuff, but Jan Varoufakis proposed one as well. But basically, so the idea would be that any new company that starts, when they issue shares, some of them would be held in like a public fund, and gradually, so the fund would hold shares in all the companies, so that whenever the companies pay dividends, it wouldn't just go to private shareholders, but it would go split out among society. It kind of builds on what you were saying about how all wealth is socially created. So although the wealth of a company like Apple, they pay dividends, the shareholders get all the value for that. Actually, a lot of the technology in your iPhone is actually publicly funded, most of it actually, like from microchips to Siri to the internet to the touch screen. Actually, that was through publicly funded programs or universities that then developed that technology, which then Apple was sort of commercialised and reaped the reward from. But even similarly, and then the people who developed that technology, they've used things that people in generations past of learned, and it's the sort of idea that all wealth is sort of socially created naturally. There's quite a strong argument that, you know, whenever companies are, you know, shouldn't just be private shareholders who reap reward from that, but it should be a societal reward as well, and that's how the dividend would be funded.
I mean, that's a great story to tell about the social creation of wealth, you know, because that's not how people think about it. They think Steve Jobs is a genius who created all that stuff on his own, but you know, so we kind of need to kind of try and shift that narrative.
I'm probably just being stupid because I don't understand economics. But how would something like that work? For instance, if it was Apple, like a multinational like corporation, would they pay back into the country that they were based, or you know, would their factory workers in China get a share, or do you know what I mean? Like how does that wealth get shared?
Yeah, that's a big challenge in globalisation. Because the other thing, the questions that these raise as well, same as citizens' income actually. So there's not only that problem about the multinational element of companies, but also it raises the question, if there is a citizen's income, which every citizen gets, raises the question of, well, who is the citizen? And who gets that? Yeah. So in this country, if it wasn't in place, there'd be questions like, well, who gets that? Who doesn't? Because you need to draw the line somewhere. Where is that line? Yeah. And it's like, it raises all these questions about, you know, where is that line of a citizen, and what, you know, who is worthy and who isn't, kind of thing. So there's lots of unanswered questions effectively, and this hasn't been implemented. The only place that has been implemented to keep close or not kind of accents, Alaska, where with the oil well, since the 1970s, I think, called the Alaska Permanent Fund, which means that each year some of the revenue from oil royalties goes into this public fund, and each year they pay out a dividend equally to all Alaskans, which is basically the returns on the fund from the oil well, which is quite interesting actually, given that it's where Sarah Palin's from. But it's kind of used as a way to the danger. One of the criticisms that's always levied at universal basic income. The reason why some right-wing people support it is because it would be as a replacement for kind of public services. And then Alaska has some signs of that where, you know, we get this dividend, so, you know, we don't need, you know, basic, some more basic stuff. That's not like an insurmountable thing, but it's just, I think it's an interesting tangible example of where a model like this has happened, but that's in the case of natural resource wealth rather than, you know, like man-made wealth and capital stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of people on the right support basic income. A lot of people in Silicon Valley and stuff support it because they have the view that automation will take work away. So they need to find ways of keeping people away with the pitchforks and stuff. But my view on that is like you just take them on. You know, you kind of you need to use that because some of them are putting a lot of money into schemes as well. But you just use that to forward the idea and make sure that you it's a risk, but you don't let them diminish public services and stuff. Because I think giving people a basic income is very, very transformative. It will change all sorts of things. Yeah.
But you know, there's an element of the population that did really done very economically well out of the EU, out of New Labour, and they would be some of the most ardent campaigners, and they kind of now are dismissing this kind of populist type. But to me, as someone mentioned earlier, the idea of populism is obviously quite an anachronistic sort of term. It doesn't really, it kind of is thrown a duvet over the kind of actual problems that are there. This is because the actual declining material living standards for all elements of the population in Britain, well, a lot of them, that haven't benefited from neoliberalism as others have.
Yeah. Good point.
So it's not necessarily whether you construct a new narrative or not. Also, narratives are still important, but I think that engaging on an individual level, as you're doing on a local level, somehow kind of breaks down these mass narratives, and it's maybe more fertile ground for
good point. Wouldn't disagree with it. Yeah, somebody else might want to though.
Any more questions?
Does anyone have any more questions for the other speakers as well?
Yeah. No? Yeah, so thanks a lot for that. We'll finish up there, I think. But yeah, I have to say, sorry that Aaron Bastani didn't show up. He was meant to. He must have got lost halfway. I don't know. But hopefully that, you know, we'll find out. Literally unforeseeable. Not seen anyway. But that's why we extended the discussion, which I'm sure you all found to be quite fruitful. So thanks again to our speakers. That was.